This presentation isn't about the mishaps of the Chernobyl power plant, but rather the effects it had on the surrounding areas. Some effects were visible immediately, while others took a few months or even years to develop. During the explosion, only 2 men died, but after a few weeks, 30 more people died due to acute radiation exposure. As mentioned earlier, over 200,000 people had to relocate. These people were forced into new cities, which obviously can make a city very congested. A perfect example of direct occurrence would be the annihilation of what was now known as the Red Forest. All of the trees in the Red Forest shortly died and turned a ginger brown color after the disaster at the power plant due to the intake of extreme amounts of radiation. It is said the Red Forest houses the radiation that is equivalent to 200 times the amount of the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. There were also many fish and livestock that were considered harmful to be used as food due to the risk of radiation poisoning. Next, the Chernobyl power plant was located next to the Pripyat River, which feeds into the Dnieper Reservoir system, which is one of the largest surface water systems in Europe. This reservoir supplied 2.4 million residents of the region. The water supply had to be pushed to the Desna River. Also, it is said by the Soviet and Western scientists that Belarus received about 60% of the contamination following the accident. Short-term effects are rather obvious, but there are some more direct and indirect long-term effects. Humans can be indirectly affected through fishing, surface deposits, crops, water, and livestock. They can be directly affected through inhalation of the air that is contaminated. In a report published in 2005, it was reported that nearly 6,000 cases of thyroid cancer in infants and adolescents, while 11,000 cases in adults were attributed to the radiation from the accident. These numbers are extremely speculative based on the fact that the Soviets did not release much information regarding the total number of people who were affected by the disaster. There was also a report from the University of New Mexico that speculated that over 9,000 fatal cancers can possibly be contributed to the issue at Chernobyl. There was also a hike in mental issues as well as deformities of infants born in the years following the events at Chernobyl. West Berlin saw a jump in children born with Down syndrome. Between 1980 and 1986, on average, 25 out of 1,000 births resulted in a child with Down syndrome. In 1987, this number went to 46. This could be in large part due to the 12 babies born in January with Down syndrome, which is 9 months after May. Hint, hint. Also, there was a spike of neutral tube defects in Turkey. In the years leading up to this fiasco, the number of babies born with the NTDs was around 5 per 1,000. But in the 6 month span following the disaster, it went up to 20. Humans were not the only affected life form that was hurt in the long run, but animals were as well. Many animals in the area died following the incident because their thyroids would get destroyed from the radiation. In the 4 years following the disaster, farms in Ukraine faced nearly 350 animals being born with deformities such as missing or extra limbs, missing eyes, heads or ribs, or deformed skulls. In comparison, only 3 abnormal births had been registered in the 5 years prior. Coincidence? I think not. Some of these images may look familiar to you because they are portrayed very accurately in Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. You may recollect them from the single-player mission All Gillied Up and multiplayer maps Block and Vacant. Ironically, the Soviets thought the nuclear power plant was seen as safer than any other power plant. Obviously, that was not the case here, since this region is considered uninhabitable for anyone.
On March 11, 2011, a 9.0 earthquake and tsunami occurred off the coast of Fukushima, Japan. In Fukushima, there was a nuclear reactor housing 6 reactor turbines. Now, the earthquake had shut off the main power for these, but the fuel rods within these nuclear reactors were still hot. So the backup generators were started to try and cool these nuclear fuel rods. However, the tsunami waves washed over the reactor walls and flooded the backup generators, stopping all cooling of these nuclear fuel rods. And because there was no place for this heat to dissipate to, the the heated fuel rods still stayed warm within the reactors, and they actually stayed hot until July when they were finally able to cycle water through these reactors to cool them. Now, later in that day, engineers noticed that there was a buildup of around 24,000 to 30,000 kilograms of hydrogen gas caused by a reaction between the metal plating of the reactor walls and the water that was being used to turn into steam itself. This erupted in 4 of the 6 reactors, and iodine 131 and other radioactive chemicals were released as high as 4,000 MSV an hour into the atmosphere. The maximum for U.S. radiation workers is 50 MSV a year. So the backup batteries that were supposed to control this entire controlling process were also unable to get there because they were stuck in the city with a bunch of people fleeing in the opposite direction. There are several emerging environmental issues as a result of the radiation that we are just starting to see at Fukushima. If you look at the top left, you'll see we have a species of moths that are found naturally within that area. If you'll notice the discoloration in their wings and in their thorax, these are both signs of radioactive poisoning, toxic doses. If you look directly below that, we'll see one of the dead zones caused by the reactor's incident itself. Now, directly to the right of that is a fish. And this fish just washed up on the coast of Fukushima about 2 or 3 months ago with over 2,500 times the legal limit of radiation. And right above that, in all those containers, is the radioactive water that they used to cool down the fuel rods still in the reactors. And that water is radioactive. And not only is it starting to leak out of those containers, but they have no way of properly disposing of it. So these are just some of the emerging environmental issues that we're starting to see at Fukushima.